Have you ever felt like loving you might be a burden to someone else? Like no matter what you do, how quiet, how kind, how helpful, you still fear that just existing might push people away. That's the world Shinji Ikari lives in. Shinji Ikari is one of the most mocked characters in anime history. Too whiny, too weak, too passive. For decades, he's been the punchline of a joke, a meme passed around online like a warning sign for what not to be. In a culture that prizes strength, stoicism, and boldness, Shinji is none of those things. He flinches, he cries, he hesitates over and over again. Okay, but if you stop laughing and start listening, something else begins to emerge. Because Shinji isn't a caricature, he's a mirror. And for those who've ever felt invisible, unloved, or quietly broken, that mirror reflects something uncomfortably familiar. Shinji is not weak. Shinji is wounded. He's not afraid of pain. He's afraid of being a burden. Afraid that his presence does more harm than good. And the tragedy isn't that he feels this way, it's that he has reasons too. This video isn't about defending Shinji. It's about understanding him, okay? And in the process, maybe understanding yourself. Okay, buried beneath the memes and mockery is a brutal, honest portrait of what it means to live with core shame. The kind that doesn't scream, but seeps quietly into the way you speak, stand, ask for help, or never ask at all. So many stories glorify trauma as fuel for greatness, a call to rise, evolve, and conquer. But Evangelion isn't interested in that kind of arc. It doesn't offer you a clean redemption or a cathartic battle cry. Instead, it holds a cracked mirror up to the softest part of your psyche and says, this is what survival looks like. When love has always been out of reach, sometimes what looks like weakness is actually a survival response. And sometimes the characters we mock are the ones who understand us the most. The shame that built a boy. Before you ever meet Shinji the pilot, you meet Shinji the child, alone, silent, and uncertain. There's a reason for that silence. A reason he always seems to be folding into himself. And it's not because he doesn't care. It's because he's terrified too. Terrified that if he reaches out, he'll be ignored, or worse, rejected. At the center of Shinji's pain is a wound deeper than fear. It's shame. Not the kind that comes from doing something wrong, but the kind that whispers you are wrong, not lovable, not enough, not even worth noticing unless you're useful. This is what psychologists call core shame, a fundamental belief that your existence is a problem to be solved. And in Shinji's case, that belief starts with one man, his father. Kando Ikari doesn't yell, he doesn't insult, he simply withholds affection, attention, approval, and for a child, silence is often louder than words. Because a parent's absence doesn't register as their failure, it registers as yours. Children don't think, my father can't love me. They think, I must not be lovable. When Jindo finally does acknowledge Shinji, it's never to affirm him, it's to use him, to pilot the Eva, to be of service, to function, okay? And Shinji agrees, over and over, even when it destroys him, okay? Because for someone drowning in shame, even conditional approval feels like air. Ki keeps climbing into that robot, not out of heroism, but out of desperation. A tiny part of him still believes that if he suffers enough, performs well enough, becomes strong enough, maybe, just maybe, he'll finally be accepted. This isn't bravery, it's bargaining. It's the Evangelion isn't just a mech, it's a confession. If I save everyone, maybe someone will save me. Shinji's trauma isn't that he fights angels, it's that he learns to equate worth with performance. He doesn't know how to receive love freely, because he's never been given it without conditions. This is why Shinji hesitates to fight, not because he's a coward, but because every time he gets in that Eva, he risks losing the last scraps of himself. And no one around him, not Masato, not Risuko, not even Rei, cruelly notices what he's giving up, because they're all caught in their own survival stories too, okay? The truth is, Shinji doesn't want to run away. He just doesn't believe he belongs, okay? And sometimes, the more you feel like an outsider, the more you freeze. Not out of defiance, but from learned helplessness. Psychologists define learned helplessness as a condition where someone, after repeated trauma or failure, stops trying, even when opportunities to escape or grow exist, because the mind has internalized the belief that nothing will change. Sound familiar? I mustn't run away, Shinji says. But he's not convincing you. He's trying to convince himself. And still, people mock him, as if emotional paralysis is something you can shake off like a bad habit, as if grief, abandonment, and shame don't leave residue in the nervous system. And beyond good and evil, Nietzsche writes, invisible threads are the strongest ties. We often think of trauma as dramatic or loud, but the deepest wounds are usually invisible. The thread between Shinji and his father, between love and usefulness, between fear and performance. These threads bind tighter than steel. And here's where it gets personal. It's because you don't have to be an EVA pilot to understand the feeling of being loved for what you do, but not for who you are. You don't have to fight angels to know the exhaustion of constantly trying to prove your worth, of confusing kindness with currency, of feeling like a burden when you stop performing. So many of us carry this quietly, and the more we carry it, the more we disappear into the roles we think will make us safe. But Shinji doesn't disappear. He stumbles, he shakes, he sobs, but he stays. And that, in its own quiet way, is revolutionary. Because in a world that tells you to toughen up, to move on, to stop crying, Shinji cries. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the healing starts. The freeze response, masquerading as laziness. You either break the rules or break yourself. Shinji broke himself. Shinji doesn't scream. He doesn't rebel. He doesn't demand anything. He simply folds. A world that seems to reward explosive power and punishing drive. The Narutos who charge forward, the Guts who resist fate, the Tanjiros who keep getting back up. Shinji does the opposite. He hesitates. He withdraws. He freezes. Because of that, he's often called lazy, passive, even pathetic. But what if that freeze isn't weakness? What if it's something deeper, something learned? In the 1960s, psychologist Martin Seligman conducted an infamous and controversial experiment. Dogs were subjected to mild electric shocks they couldn't escape. After repeated exposure, they stopped trying to flee, even when an escape route was eventually made available. They'd internalized the belief, nothing I do makes a difference, so they stopped trying. This became the foundation of the theory of learned helplessness, a psychological state where repeated experiences of failure, punishment, or powerlessness lead a person to believe they are fundamentally incapable of changing their situation. It's not laziness. It's not apathy. It's exhaustion born of futility. Shinji exists in this space. Every time he tries to reach out, to Misato, to his father, to Rei, to Asuka, he's punished with coldness, ambiguity, or rejection. He learns that showing up, emotionally or physically, doesn't guarantee safety. It barely even guarantees acknowledgement. So slowly, quietly, he learns to stop reaching out at all. Anime often presents protagonists who are fragile but fight anyway, and who are ultimately rewarded for it. They get stronger, okay? They win friends. They save the world. Evangelion subverts this completely. When Shinji pilots the EVA, he doesn't gain clarity or connection. He gains trauma. Every battle breaks him more. Every conversation erodes his sense of identity. It's not empowered by his role. He's shattered by it. This is a world where sensitivity is not valued. It is penalized. His moments of tenderness, reaching out to Kaworu, opening up to Rei, are met with profound existential consequences. And the few times he does push back, it results in more chaos, more guilt, more reasons to withdraw. So eventually, he doesn't fight anymore. He folds into himself like a shield. It's not that he doesn't care, it's that he's learned caring doesn't change anything. In trauma psychology, we talk a lot about fight or flight, but there's a third, quieter response that rarely gets the same attention. Freeze, when the body and mind assess a situation as dangerous and uncontrollable. The instinct is not to fight back or run away, it's to shut down, to play dead, to dissociate. This is where Shinji lives, a world of overstimulation, unclear rules, unreachable adults, and enormous literal and metaphorical pressure. So he detaches, emotionally, psychologically. He goes still in the middle of storms he never asked to be in. This is not cowardice. This is trauma physiology. The deeper tragedy of Shinji's learned helplessness is how invisible it becomes. To others, it looks like laziness, like a refusal to try. But this stillness, this numb, mechanical, glassy-eyed inaction, is a symptom of complete emotional burnout. There's a kind of control in giving up. When everything feels chaotic and hopeless, doing nothing can feel like the last sliver of agency you have. If I don't try, I can't fail. Okay. If I don't reach out, I can't be rejected. Okay. If I don't move, maybe I won't be hurt again. This is the logic of the freeze response. Okay. It is cruelly rational. Okay. And it is often mistaken for weakness, even though it takes everything just to maintain it. Most anime characters are transformed by adversity. They grow, they awaken hidden powers. Shinji shrinks. Each episode peels another layer off his defenses until he becomes translucent, a boy who cannot tell where he ends and others begin. A boy who has nothing left to offer but still keeps being asked to save the world. We're watching what happens when someone is asked to keep performing in pain, with no space to process it. And Evangelion never gives us the comfort of seeing him get better in the traditional sense. There is no sudden epiphany, no training arc, no cathartic victory. There is only the long, awkward, deeply human process of existing in pain and still wanting to be loved. Children raised in chaotic, emotionally inconsistent environments often face this unbearable choice. Do I honor my emotions and risk being punished or abandoned? Or do I silence myself and stay safe? Shinji chooses silence. He internalizes the idea that expressing his needs is dangerous, so he stops expressing them at all. He becomes agreeable, compliant, quiet. He's not lazy. He's not passive. He's just someone who's been taught that every attempt to change his life will either fail or cost him something precious. And in that world, stillness feels like the only protection. Here's the most painful truth about characters like Shinji and the people who relate to them. They are trying. They are always trying. It just doesn't look heroic. They're not charging forward with fire in their eyes. They're not yelling speeches about friendship and dreams. They are sitting quietly in rooms where they no longer believe they belong. They are walking through days that feel like fog. They are answering one more call, showing up one more time, even when everything inside them says not to. That's not weakness, it's survival. If you've ever judged yourself for being lazy, for freezing, for not doing enough, for feeling numb, maybe you weren't broken. Maybe you were just trying to stay safe. Okay, there is dignity in surviving, even when it looks like stillness, especially when it looks like stillness. And perhaps the most compassionate thing we can do for Shinji and for ourselves is to stop asking why we didn't fight harder. Start asking what we were trying to protect. The inner child that never got to grow. You're not weak for needing love. You're human. There's a quiet ache in Shinji's story that's easy to overlook. Not the agony of battle, not the weight of saving the world, but something smaller, something softer, a pain that feels more like being forgotten than destroyed. In between apocalyptic stakes and mecha warfare, Evangelion keeps returning to the same image, a child sitting alone in a room. hands in his lap, eyes lowered, waiting for someone who never arrives. It's easy to forget that Shinji is only 14, not because he acts mature, but because Evangelion never lets him simply be a child. From the moment he's introduced, he's treated more like a tool than a person. Sato tells him he must pilot the Eva or leave. Gendo won't even look him in the eye. Even the other children, wounded in their own ways, don't really know how to reach him. And yet, beneath Shinji's silence, his fear, his shame, isn't a soldier, isn't a hero. It's a child. It's begging, quietly. Please tell me I'm okay. Please say I'm enough. But no one says it. So he says it to himself, over and over. I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away. It becomes a mantra. It's a substitute for love. In psychology, arrested development describes what happens when emotional growth is stalled by trauma. This doesn't mean someone is immature or childish. It means their emotional world was frozen at the point where they stopped feeling safe. For Shinji, that moment is etched into him. His mother dies, his father disappears, and all the grown-ups around him stop treating him like someone to protect and start treating him like someone to use. So while his body grows, his emotional self never quite catches up. He avoids conflict. He appeases authority. He never feels entitled to say what he wants or what hurts. This is the psychology of the neglected child, always second-guessing their needs, always bracing for disappointment, always hoping, quietly, that someone will see them before they disappear again. Children don't think in abstract moral concepts. They don't say, my parent was emotionally unavailable. They say, I must not be lovable. This is the root of core shame. Not guilt over something you've done, but the belief that who you are is fundamentally wrong. Shinji carries this weight like a second skin. He doesn't just feel bad about running away or hesitating. He feels bad for existing. He sees himself as a burden, a disappointment, a placeholder. And the cruel irony is that the more ashamed he feels, the more passive he becomes, which only reinforces how others treat him, as ineffective, useless, weak. But they're not seeing a weakling, okay? They're seeing the afterimage of a child who was never nurtured into wholeness, okay? What makes Evangelion so haunting is that it doesn't give us one broken child. It gives us a trinity, okay? A screams for validation, okay? Her strength is a mask for desperation. She was taught to be exceptional because anything less meant she didn't matter. Rei exists in a state of emotional non-existence. She obeys, adapts, submits, unsure if she's even real, let alone loved. Shinji folds inward. He doesn't demand or resist. He retreats, because every time he reaches out, the world goes cold. Each of them is a study in how children internalize pain. But Shinji's wound is different. His pain isn't loud. It's quiet. It's not violent. It's numb. He doesn't act out. He disappears. And in doing so, he represents a type of suffering that is tragically common and tragically dismissed. When Shinji breaks down, it's not an overreaction. It's not emotional weakness. It's the delayed scream of someone who never got to cry when it first hurt. The bathtub scene, the train monologues, the dreamlike purgatory of the final episodes. These are not moments of drama. They're moments of collapse. His mind is desperately trying to make sense of feelings that were never allowed to exist in the open. Grief that had to be hidden. Loneliness that had to be downplayed. Anger that had to be swallowed. He's not crying because he's weak. He's crying because he's finally safe enough to feel. Imagine for a moment that Shinji had someone, just one person, who could hold him, look him in the eyes, and say, "You're not a burden. You're not wrong for being scared. You don't have to earn love by being useful." That kind of validation doesn't fix trauma, but it gives trauma somewhere to rest. Tate. In Evangelion, that space doesn't exist. So, Shinji's need for love, the most human, most innocent need of all, is painted as weakness. And because we live in a world that still punishes vulnerability, we absorb that message. We mock Shinji for crying. We laugh at him for freezing. We turn his humanness into a meme. But beneath all that judgment is a mirror. Maybe you weren't raised in a post-apocalyptic world. Maybe you never piloted a biomechanical nightmare to stop extinction. But maybe you were the quiet kid, the sensitive one, the one who tried not to cause problems, the one who learned that being good meant being small, agreeable, invisible. And maybe you still carry that child inside you, the one who flinches when they speak up, the one who bristles at compliments, the one who still wonders if they're too much or not enough. This act isn't just about Shinji. It's about the parts of you that never got to grow because they never felt safe enough to start. So, here is the truth Shinji deserved to hear. And maybe you do too. You are not weak for needing love. You are not broken because you want to be held, okay? You are not a burden just because you hurt. You're human, okay? And that's enough. The fear of being a burden, okay? It would be better if I wasn't here. Shinji doesn't scream when he's hurting. He leaves. He disappears. He folds himself up into a quiet corner like a bruise trying not to spread. And from the outside, it might look like cowardice. The infamous Shinji ran away again. But that's not what's happening. Shinji's retreats aren't about escaping danger. They're about escaping the unbearable idea that his presence is the danger. There's a specific kind of shame that doesn't come from doing something wrong, but from simply being there at all. We see it in how Shinji hesitates to speak, how he waits for permission to feel, how he accepts blame even when nothing was his fault. This isn't false humility. It's not performative modesty. It's what psychologists call avoidant guilt, a belief that your existence imposes on others, that your emotions are too loud, your needs too much, your being excessive. So you shrink. You apologize before anyone accuses you. You start thinking the most helpful thing you can do is disappear. Shinji embodies this so perfectly, it's painful to watch. Again and again, when things go wrong, he doesn't get angry. He gets gone. He tells himself, it would be better if I wasn't here. There's a critical misunderstanding when people watch Shinji spiral. They say he's self-absorbed, dramatic, that he's wallowing in self-pity. But look closer. There's nothing indulgent about Shinji's sadness. It's not I deserve better. It's maybe they deserve better than me. That's not pity. That's self-erasure. He doesn't center himself in his despair. He removes himself from it entirely, as if his presence only makes things worse, as if he's the flaw in every equation, the static in every signal, the one variable that ruins everything just by being there. This is what shame does. It doesn't just hurt. It convinces you that your hurt hurts other people. So you go quiet. You go numb. You start calling your absence a kindness. Watch how often Shinji tries to be easy to deal with. He never says, I'm scared. He says, I'm fine. He never says, please help me. He says, it's okay. Don't worry about me. These lines aren't signs of maturity. They're symptoms of someone who believes needing others is selfish. And where does that belief come from? It comes from being taught over and over that your needs are too inconvenient to matter, that expressing yourself leads to punishment, not comfort, that the more you open up, the more likely you will be abandoned. So you stop asking, you stop speaking, you stop showing pain because it never brought you closer to anyone. This is what happens when you internalize the message that your vulnerability is a burden. You start performing in vulnerability, not to appear strong, but to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. Shame doesn't speak, it hides. It wraps itself in silence and calls it politeness. In the silence, it doesn't protect you. It protects the illusion that you're fine, that everything is under control, that you don't need anything, and therefore won't lose anything. But the cost is profound, because in that silence, you don't just lose connection, you lose yourself. Your wants fade, your voice fades, even your identity starts to dim, until all that's left is whatever version of you is easiest for others to tolerate. This is the quiet devastation of shame. It doesn't demand attention. It withholds it until you feel like the ghost of a person who was once allowed to exist. Think of the elevator scene, or when Shinji stands by Osaka's hospital bed, unable to speak, or the countless times he turns away from others, even when they're reaching out. He's not trying to be cruel. He's not pushing people away to punish them. He's trying to disappear without being noticed, because in his mind, that's the kindest thing he can do. The tragic irony is that his withdrawal does hurt the people around him. But it's not because he's bad. It's because he was never shown how to stay. Okay? Maybe you recognize some of this. Maybe you were the child who never wanted to ask for too much. The teen who learned to self-soothe before anyone offered comfort. The adult who always smiles and says, "I'm good," even when something inside is breaking. And maybe you believed, deep down, that being low maintenance made you lovable, that being silent made you safe, that being invisible made you worthy. But it didn't. It just made you disappear a little more every year. Here's the truth Shinji never got to hear. Needing others isn't a flaw. Expressing pain isn't selfish. You are not a burden just because you feel things deeply. You deserve to exist. Not quietly, not apologetically, but fully. You deserve to take up space in someone's life without shrinking yourself to fit into their comfort zone. You deserve relationships where your sadness isn't treated like guilt, but like something human, something okay, something shared. What if the very thing you're most afraid of, being seen, being known, being needed, is not a threat, but a gift? What if your vulnerability, instead of burdening people, opens a door to real intimacy? What if you're not too much, but exactly enough? And what if all this time, the people who made you feel like a problem were just never equipped to love you the way you deserved? That's not your fault. That's not your shame to carry. So next time that voice whispers, "It would be better if I wasn't here," answer back, "No, I deserve to be here, fully, loudly, softly me." The courage to feel anyway. Healing doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like showing up while still shaking. Shinji Ikari doesn't save the world with confidence. He doesn't ride into battle full of conviction. There is no swelling music, no triumphant pose. Sometimes he can barely stand. His hands tremble. His voice breaks. He flinches at the weight of being alive. And still, he shows up again and again, despite everything in him begging not to. He steps into the Eva. Shinji doesn't pilot to be a hero. He doesn't fight for glory or justice or revenge. In truth, he barely fights at all. What drives him is quieter, messier, more painfully human. It's the desperate hope that if he shows up, someone might finally look at him and say, "I'm glad you're here." That's it. Not praise, not admiration, just presence, belonging. This is the ache underneath every one of Shinji's choices. Not power, not duty, not even survival. Connection, even if it's fractured, even if it hurts, even if he has to earn it through suffering. He believes, or wants to believe, that if he sacrifices enough, if he suffers enough, then maybe he'll be worthy of love. It's a terrible transaction. But when love has only ever felt conditional, you start to think that pain is part of the price. Sometimes Shinji lashes out. Sometimes he freezes. Sometimes he spirals inward so far that no one can reach him. But behind all of that is a boy who still believes that maybe, if he just does enough, someone will choose him. He steps into the Eva, not because he's strong, but because he wants to matter. And for people who've grown up feeling invisible, that desire to be needed, to be felt by someone, can be the only thing keeping them going. There is a quiet kind of bravery that doesn't get romanticized. It's not the kind of strength that lifts buildings or shouts into the void. It's the kind that wakes up again after another night of feeling useless, that answers a phone call even when your chest is tight with dread, that shows up to work, to school, to life, while your mind whispers, "You're a failure." Shinji lives in that space. He doesn't overcome his shame. He doesn't transform into a confident leader. He just keeps going. And sometimes that's enough. Stories would reward Shinji for his perseverance. There'd be redemption, resolution, a neat ending where everything makes sense. Evangelion doesn't do that. Even at its most hopeful, the pain doesn't vanish. Shinji doesn't suddenly become whole. He doesn't become fearless. He doesn't even always make the right choice, but he does begin to feel again. Not all at once, not perfectly, but enough to suggest something crucial, that being broken doesn't disqualify you from being alive. We're often sold the idea that healing has to look like triumph. That is a transformation, a rise from Dash's moment, okay? You'll be so healed, you won't even recognize yourself, okay? But that's not how it really works. Not for most people. Healing often looks like crying in the shower and still getting dressed. It's like saying, "I'm not okay," and letting someone hear it. It's like finally believing, even just a little, that you don't have to earn your right to be loved. And sometimes, healing just means you feel something again, even if it's not peace, even if it's pain. Because pain means you're still here, and being here means you still have a chance. Shinji's most repeated line, "I mustn't run away," isn't a declaration of strength. It's a wish, a trembling mantra. It's not about facing danger. It's about facing himself, facing the guilt, the shame, okay? The unbearable idea that he is, somehow, fundamentally unwanted, okay? But every time he whispers it, no matter how many times he fails, he tries again. And maybe that's what makes him heroic, not the fighting, the fact that he keeps trying to stay human in a world that tells him not to be. Maybe you know this kind of bravery. Maybe you've held it in your chest on the mornings you didn't want to wake up. Maybe you've carried it into rooms where you felt too small, too loud, too broken to belong, but still showed up anyway. That courage is invisible. It doesn't win awards. It doesn't always change anything on the outside, but it matters, because every time you choose to feel, every time you choose to show up while still hurting, you are rewriting the rules of your shame. You are saying, "I don't have to be healed to be here. I just have to be real." Evangelion ends in a place of ambiguity. It's not triumph, not tragedy, just possibility. And maybe that's the most honest ending we can hope for. Because healing isn't a finish line, it's a practice, a choice. Return again and again to the belief that even if you're not fixed, you are still worthy of love. Shinji is not strong because he wins. He's strong because he stays, not in the Eva, but in the world. With all its noise, all its fear, all its unbearable beauty, the courage to feel is the only way through. You don't need to be certain. You don't need to be whole. You don't need to be better than you were yesterday. You just need to feel. Because to feel is to be alive, okay? To hurt is not to fail. It's to remain human, okay? And in a world that so often demands you go numb just to survive, feeling anyway is the bravest thing you can do. You are not a burden. Shinji doesn't conquer his pain. He doesn't defeat it, or transcend it, or rise above it in some perfect arc of resolution. He learns to sit with it, to breathe through it, to live alongside it without letting it erase him. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's more than enough. You don't have to be healed to be worthy. You don't have to be fearless to be strong. You don't have to be silent to be loved. Because breakdowns are not failures. Tears are not weakness. The need for gentleness is not something to outgrow. If you've ever felt like your pain made you unworthy, if you've ever questioned whether your softness disqualifies you, if you've ever looked at the world and thought, It would be better if I wasn't here. Please hear this. You are not a burden. You never were. Your ache doesn't make you hard to love. Your quiet doesn't make you invisible. And your need for care, for rest, for reassurance, for safety, doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. There's no shame in needing to be held. No failure in not having it all figured out. You weren't meant to carry the weight of the world on your own, even if you've learned to act like you can. Even if you've worn the mask so long it feels like your skin. Even if it's easier to retreat than to risk being seen. You're still allowed to be held, to be comforted, to be told, I'm glad you're here. So, if you see yourself in Shinji, not because of weakness, but because you've spent your whole life surviving your own quiet wars, then you are not alone. And your story doesn't have to end in silence. You're not Shinji because you're weak. It's Shinji because you're still here, even when it hurts. And that is something to be proud of. Something in this video made you pause. If a line stayed with you, or a feeling surfaced you didn't expect, I'd like to invite you to share it. Write in the comments which moment resonated the most with you. Sometimes, putting it into words helps you realize that mattered to me, that was real. Your reflection might be the reminder someone else needs, and your voice matters here. If you'd like to see more videos like this, consider subscribing to Threads of Self. We make these not to give you answers, but to give you space, to feel, to think, to rest. And if there's a character or anime you'd like us to explore next, let us know. This isn't just a channel, it's a conversation. We'll see you in the next one.